Marine Le Pen says multiculturalism ends in war. She's predicted to knock Nicolas Sarkozy out of France's presidential elections next year. Madame Le Pen, the first words of your party programme are "Let's liberate France." Liberate it from what?
I
want to free France from the EU straitjacket. The European Union wants to force 150 million immigrants on us over the next 30 years. They say we're not having enough babies. Well, let's encourage people to have kids, as they do elsewhere in the world, rather than wave in the immigrants. The EU's expanding at France's expense. We no longer control our own territory, our own currency, or our own laws. We don't decide who comes in or stays in our country. They impose directives on us without even consulting people. All this is hurting our economy and discouraging foreign investment. Secondly, we must liberate the French from the insides, free them from this guilt that their leaders have placed on them for so many years, that we're bad people, that we're colonialists. The French must rediscover a love for themselves, love for their culture and civilization, which has been the admiration of people around the world.
You say France is on the brink of an Egyptian revolution. How do you mean?
There's horrific social suffering in our country. A divide's forming between a tiny oligarchy, which systematically grabs profits in all situations, and the people on whom they impose permanent sacrifice. France has 5 million unemployed, 6 million workers living in poverty. There's an incredibly strong sense of injustice, like the Egyptian people feel, and that's driving us.
Would you risk French soldiers' lives to interfere in Ivory Coast's civil war?
This is a huge mistake. It will be seen as a post-colonial reaction by France, that we don't view other people as our equals, that we don't consider other nations to be sovereign. We decide who's bad and who's good, so we take the good guy and put him in by force. This is a conflict for the Ivory Coast, for the Ivory Coast people to solve. Regional diplomats may get involved, not France. Once again, we show France strong arms its will on others, just like in the past. We're behaving like the world's policemen. I also believe Russia's stance on this issue has been extremely wise.
Does France bombing Libya raise the risk of a terrorist attack on France?
Oui, bien sûr.
Yes, this creates two major threats. First, there's now more risk of a terrorist attack. For a start, there aren't bad guys on one side and good guys on the other. We know perfectly well the so-called rebels are from a tribe with many former jihadists who fought in Iraq and Afghanistan. We're trying to put them in power. People who don't always have a peaceful, friendly attitude to our country. The second major threat is seeing a flood of immigrants, because the effect we're having is to open up Libya's borders.
There are around 6 million Muslims in France. Do you want to bring that number down?
They say we're in a democracy, but authorities refuse to show the real figures on how many immigrants there are. There are probably 6 to 7 million Muslims here already, plus additional immigration on a massive scale each year. This is an organised replacement of our population. This threatens our very survival. We don't have the means to integrate those who are already here. The result is endless cultural conflict.
When you were a lawyer before becoming a politician, you had to defend illegal immigrants. What did that teach you about them?
It didn't teach me anything. What's more, I didn't feel any contradiction then, and I feel none now. Yes, I fight immigration, which is an economic process used by leaders with consequences on people's everyday life. It doesn't mean I hate immigrants. Immigrants are human beings who must be treated with dignity and have the right to be defended according to the laws of the country. I was a lawyer who defended immigrants. I was doing my job. I don't think a doctor who's against immigration says I won't treat this guy because he's an illegal. That's nonsense. You can be against immigration, fight immigration, suspend all immigration, but not hate immigrants as individuals. I understand immigrants want a better future here, but I honestly say to them, you can't find a better future here. We're finding it hard to give a better future to our own people as it is.
The French government has just banned wearing the full-face veil on the streets. How much further would you go?
I'll go much further. I will change the constitution to say our republic does not recognise any community. Why? Because the republic is one and indivisible. No community can have laws or rights that are different from those of the national community. Today, there's unquestionably a move by the Muslim community using political and religious groups to create separate laws. wearing the full face veil, banning certain foods in schools, separate hours for Muslims in swimming pools, calls to change the school curriculum. We're confronted with endless demands. This must stop. I say to people clearly and sincerely and honestly, everyone must submit to the French way of life, its practices, traditions and rights, with no exceptions.
En se servant de groupes politico-religieux.
How do you feel when Nicolas Sarkozy tries to steal your anti-immigrant vote?
Bah, c'est tout le problème de la droiture et de la...
That's the problem of integrity and honesty in politics, which has created a crisis for themselves. He made a series of promises stolen from the National Front and succeeded in taking some of our voters. The problem is, he hasn't kept a single promise. So he's brought nothing but disappointment from the hopes he raised. You don't see how Nicolas Sarkozy can recover or bounce back, because on immigration, on security, there's a long list of failures.
de l'espérance qu'il avait fait naître.
Why are you so against the European Union?
Ah, mais tout est absurde.
Everything about the European Union is absurd. It forces our farmland to lie fallow. Entire areas are unused, while the whole world faces hunger riots. They order us to produce less when we could provide more. This is how they behave in everything. It's appalling and grotesque.
You think the euro is bad for your country. If you become president, how soon will France leave the euro?
Je pense qu'il y a des processus de négociation d'abord à avoir.
It will take 6 months to renegotiate a Europe à la carte. The EU will have to accept member states having a certain number of treaties, because those treaties are destructive. If the EU refuses to negotiate, if it blackmails us and says it's all or nothing, then I will take responsibility and seize back France's sovereignty. I refuse to accept the imposition of treaties that harm the interests of my people.
Et je retrouverai.
You won 15% in last month's local elections. What is the next target?
Notre but, c'est d'accéder au pouvoir. Je veux dire, pour appliquer.
Our goal is simply to win power. I'm not here to make up the numbers. Today's political elites have the same big choices: alignment with the United States and unregulated free trade. So what we propose is really something different, an alternative project.
What methods is the French establishment using to stop you getting to power?
Bah oui, enfin, on est en permanence obligé.
We're forced to fight non-stop for the right to express ourselves and our ideas. Our media presence is far smaller than our share of the vote. The voting system is methodically changed as soon as they feel we can win any election. We're confronted with difficulties every day. Why? Because we're a party of patriots, because we defend our homeland. They have another ideology, the ideology of globalisation and dissolution of our identities. Nations and homelands are replaced by the law of free trade, which governs everything. Since we defend our country and give back power to the people, so a nation can be sovereign and people can make their own decisions, the political elite sees us as a threat.
You're often described as anti-Arab, but you find some of Israel's actions unacceptable.
Ah oui, mais je leur ai même dit qu'ils commettaient une erreur politique.
Israel is making a huge political mistake. Building settlements on Palestinian land is colonialization. It's a mistake for Israel, because it's not even viable as a policy. I strongly believe Israel has the right to security, but Palestine also has a right to a territory with independence and secure borders, which isn't the case at the moment. France has lost its influence and power in this conflict, which I regret, because it could have been a powerful diplomatic voice.
Why do you call Russia France's most important ally?
Ah oui, parce que je pense que nos deux nations.
Russia is part of our civilization. We have common roots, a long history of great friendship between Russia and France. I find it insane that we're placed under the American yoke and systematically have to bow to America's decisions. I believe we should turn to Russia for economic and energy partnerships. I think very objectively this Cold War imposed by America on relations with Russia is a huge political error.
Russia has suffered many terrorist attacks. Do you feel we're fighting a common enemy?
Bien sûr. Bien sûr.
Yes, I am particularly sensitive to the problem of terrorism. When I was 8 years old, we suffered a terrorist attack on our home while we were asleep. So I know how you feel when you're victims of these attacks, which was blind and cowardly as they are violent. I have absolutely no sympathy towards terrorism. We must work as closely as possible to win this fight.
Ce combat-là.
Marine Le Pen, head of the National Front, thank you for speaking with our team.